Yes, okay, so the recording has begun. Okay, so just a quick reminder for everybody for the structure of the meeting, which is 40 minutes of a presentation by the speaker, Hongju and Nick Hay, who is now here.
There we go.
Hi, Nick. Hello. I was just introducing you. And then we would have a 30-minute Q&A session with the attendees after a 40-minute-ish presentation by the speaker, so it's not a hard limit. And then we will have a summary and some feedback and questions and answers by Carl. I would encourage everybody to turn on their cameras if they are comfortable to do so, just to foster more of an active engagement and support. But yeah, and that's it from me. So I'll hand it over to Nick and Hongju to introduce themselves and the presentation as well. And off we go.
Great, thank you. I think we have Adam also just logging into.
There he is.
There we go.
Yeah. Hi, Adam.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, wonderful. Great, we have everybody now. So yeah, Hongju, just whenever you're ready, you can start sharing your screen and present.
Oh, yeah, sure. Actually, before me, Nick would be the first presenter. So
okay,
yeah.
Sure.
I think Adam, did you have any framing remarks, or should we just jump into it?
Well, the framing remarks would be just very excited that you're here today, and you're developing an alife simulation platform, which I think will be of interest to the group. I think it connects with Hongju's work in really interesting ways that will also be of interest to the group. And I'll just basically, I'll be in the chat just like as you talk. I'll just like make connections and that I see, and let's just go.
Perfect. All right. Okay. Well, yeah. Then and yeah, sorry to be late. I just woke up this morning realizing it's 6:30, and I do not have a link. So here we are. Okay, let's see if I can make this full screen. That's the wrong button. Here we go. Great. Okay.
Yep, we can see the screen.
Perfect. Okay, so this is a project I've been thinking about for some time, and it's in the process of being spun up. And yeah, I guess my background is in AI. I did I guess the little bio went out, but I've always been, my research works in reinforcement learning, so I've always been thinking and interested in simulation environments, and my heart has been in like neuroscience and how do humans work, and like how are our bodies involved in things, and all these sort of details. And so I've been thinking of various iterations of like what would be an environment that would be able to capture sort of the core, I guess, the core things we get from our embodiment. So there's yeah, a lot of background there. But to the thing, the basic idea of the project is trying to build this sort of combination simulation video game benchmark research environment. And the main reason I'm presenting to all you is basically I'm kind of interested to see, like, if this is a thing, if this little world here existed, how would it be most useful for doing answering research questions of you, like if you had a little world with creatures in it that people were playing. So here's the basic sense. I've got this core simulator that's got these different heads that are coming into it, that the simulation and the benchmarks will be open access for people to use and experiment with, and it'll simultaneously be a video game that'll be released that people can play with. So in my previous incarnation of the company that we were working on, developing a video game. We pivoted, but since then, and this is sort of morally kind of along those lines. So yeah, this picture's kind of got a bunch of little things in it. I think I'll just go through the pieces. The basic idea is we're going to have I'm going to build a world. It's sort of kind of like a 2D Minecraft. So you've got an environment you can modify. So everything's made of little spheres you can move around. And then there are creatures in it doing things, so a lot of artificial life creatures. And so here's a situation where there's various creatures that they've built their homes to the left, and something has created a blocking ball in the middle. Two of the creatures under it are actually trying to do something about it and move the boulder that's blocking the entrance. There's someone on top who's just sitting there having fun. There's some of the people exploring underground to mine up resources. You could imagine kind of an artificial life Minecraft. There's a tiny little worm here. So there's different forms of bodies. And then this guy is staring at the blue crystal. This is all, concept art. It would look better in the game because it would actually not just be clip art, basically. But here's then this is sort of the daytime, this is the nighttime. So you've got this is a visualization showing that there's warmth coming out of these little warm stones here. So this is where the creatures are kind of laying down for the night, except this one who's being weirdly transfixed by the crystals. Not sure what's going on there, probably fine. So that's sort of the overall world that they're in. And then the bodies of the creatures are kind of designed to have instances of sort of all the sensors most of our senses. So let me go through them kind of one by one. So this is sort of the most kind of schematic version of it. Like, I think there's different ways we can do it in different forms of richness, but I really want to have bodies that matter and that have parts that have things like energy levels of nutrients. This is the kind of artificial life angle. A temperature that can affect how things move. It can be damaged. There should be sort of some sense of organs. So like you've got digestion happening. And then the flip side of all that is the interoception that checks to see like how well, like senses the state of the body and how well it's going. So I'm kind of visualizing that by these little dots here, where each of these little parts of the creature has some sort of state about it that basically it is being maintained by homeostasis inside. Like, it's actually a model of these properties and things are being adjusted. So a little biological model there. There's also sort of the basic, this is sort of pretty similar to what you'd get in like Mojoku, the various kind of reinforcement learning robotic simulation environments that have been around for some time, but with a little bit of a biological kind of twist. But basically, motor control is being something like setting set points for angles of joints, and so that's things on the motor side of kind of the body, and then the proprioceptive side is sensing all those values. So we've got kind of our visceral senses, we've got some sort of sense of the body and the ability to move it, which is the core motor thing. Oh yeah, the visceral thing, there can also be a visceral motor component if we want to like push the simulation in that direction. So like, is there an analog of adrenaline that has to come up if you really want to push the body to a limit? I think that's all modelable. Touch, so that's literally kind of contact, possibly texture and forces. Smell, so I was thinking the creatures use smell in different kinds of ways. Moth uses smell to sort of pathfind to distant things, right? But I think mostly we use smell to kind of as in a more near field sense. So this would be a near field sense of like, what are the different kinds of materials that are around me, including other creatures. And then the final one is...
It just seems like Adam has a question. I don't know if you want to wait or if you want to interrupt. Both are fine.
You should jump in if there's a question.
So wanted to comment. I'm having trouble being in the chat, unfortunately. But so and just a general like contextualizing comment. So like the goal is basically to give what would be the dream simulation environment for richly embodied agents and of different kinds for scientific communities, and particularly like for people in the active inference community. What are the things that you would want to include? And so basically Nick is in this stage where he's going to be developing this platform. And so, what is relevant for if you wanted to capture what are the relevant dynamics of the body and mind and their relation that you want to capture in a simulation environment. And so like Nick has like all these wonderful ideas about like that he's thought through for a very long time of like what should be there in terms of like what would be like a biologically realist, a richly embodied alife creature. But also, I guess at some point, if people have thoughts of like, well, I want, there are other things that would seem relevant to them, that would be interesting also. And we could have that. I don't know if it's something to discuss like as we go or in the discussion later, but it depends on how people are feeling. But the goal basically though is to develop basically this platform. And there's things that are out there that are kind of like it, but not really. And like there's this one thing, Grid World, which seems quite promising. But the goal is to make something that has there's physics in the world, and there's aspects of embodiment that things like rhythmic properties, chemical properties, like all sorts of things you could do here that you couldn't do in anything that exists currently. And so it's like, if we were to dream, like what would be like, we want to test out active inference agents, and we just want a thing that does what we want it to do. That's the goal, basically, is like, if we actually want to build an active inference agent, whether it's for like a digital twin for like computational psychiatry or all sorts of things, like ways you can go with it, like what are the relevant things to model? And so Nick is basically going through like all the things he's thought through from like thinking very deeply over a long time about like the nature of embodied intelligence. But I'm sure the community would have additional insights. And so that's my contextualizing comment. I would have put it in the chat. I'm having trouble using the chat.
I think the chat is only accessible by admins, unfortunately. So it would be best if you just like unmute and start talking. Or raise your hand and I'll call you. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's better you said it, because then I heard it, because I'm not looking at the chat. That's for sure.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And think of this as sort of like, this is meant to kind of put some pictures in your head and provoke questions, and like be kind of rather than be sort of like, here is the world, it is Minecraft, you get what you get. More be sort of a platform or sort of a smorgasbord of like, well, okay, if you want an embodiment, what is your embodiment? Pick and choose the kind of embodiment you want. What should the senses have? What should the body look like? Does it need to be more richer in this direction or less rich? Like this is meant to, provoke your dreams either by looking at this and being like, this is wrong, it should be like this, or like, oh, that's cool, but if only it was like this. Both are welcome motivations for future requests and comments. So yeah, this is sort of like my picture of a particular set of embodiments. So those are those senses. The final sense is sort of this vision, which is basically kind of, I made a little, if you stare at it, you can kind of sort of see what's happening. So this is basically vision inside the plane. It's like the vision is one-dimensional, but the world is two-dimensional. So like picture how, I suppose Descartes thought the eye worked or something. You do the ray tracing thing. It's kind of like Wolfenstein on its side. But basically, a vision gets you materials at distances. So it's a little, it's not exactly, it's a little step in from the getting pixel values, but one could render it at that level. It's more giving you a sense of space and things that are at a distance. So here you can kind of see, you can sort of then, if you imagine each of these rays, they've got a distance and they've got a material, which is the color here. If you plot the inverse of the distance, if you plot the color at the inverse of with the width the inverse of the distance, you get this sort of 3D like view in the middle here. And this is looking from the agent's eye. The top here is this top ball. This is, you see, is kind of curving out this sort of second little thing here. It's seeing some ground in the distance. There's another circle here, and there's an and here. So it's not going to win. Drawn like this, it's not going to win video game prizes. But I think it has a lot of the schematic properties of vision at sort of the simplest possible level. So like the simpler it is, the more computation we can spend, or given our budget for doing experiments. So, oh yeah, the last sense of sound, which is basically, I'm modeling as kind of like, you've got a certain set of channels, and you can hear kinds of things that happen with a certain intensity at a distance. So this creature is hearing this bunching, the little worm up here. The worm has got all the same senses too. I guess it's got an eye too. And it's also hearing, touching this object here. So that's sort of the set of senses. And I've kind of drawn this. So I move on to kind of thinking about the world a little bit, just to show how that's parameterizable. I've kind of pictured this sort of very blocky world, but you can also have a fine world where it's sort of more like continuous mass that could be scooped up and moved. This is very much trying to be like simulated matter and take advantage of the ridiculous parallelism we have in GPUs to do the physics simulation here. But if you want something more blocky that pieces things together, you do that. If you want something that's more scooping up stuff, you do that. If you want something in the middle, you have them kind of sized like that. So that's another dimension of kind of variability. So the other space of things I'm thinking about for the simulation is also being able to model kind of morphogenetic properties of varieties of life. And this is just going to be a couple of, these are all clip art pictures, so this is just to put some imaginations in your head. But you can imagine having the ability to change the form, and you will have the ability to change the form of the creature, so you can maybe butt off some cells here and do that a couple of times, and then have sort of a simplified but still capture a bunch of the properties of how development works by cells butting off new cells or dividing into and so forth, and have kind of some biological richness through there. And you get a lot from just having a few joints, especially you get this kind of curious looking creatures holding something and looking at a ball. This is sort of meant to be sleepy. And so that was sort of like the kind of development side of things. And then
sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here, because I do see Adam with his hand up. Also, this is so cool. Just saying, but yeah. Adam?
And that's basically what I was going to say. So, like, it's so cool because like it's so right now it's if you want to do morphogenesis as active inference, like you could have like developmentally growing creatures, you have reproducing creatures, creatures where the physics is such that like I don't know, if I had the chat, I was tempted to like put in this link, your short-sighted inner fish, which is this one like theory of consciousness about where like seeing things at a distance and what this does for like your affordance landscape and putting pressure on you to like plan with depth. And so like having like rich like vision for these beings, it's like all of the it's like so what are like the evolutionary priors, I guess? So it's like an embarrassment of riches. Like, well, what do you focus on first? But it's like, well, Nick's showing it's a like here's like basically the key aspects of what are bodies like. They have a physics about them. There's sensors, there's effectors, there's a certain relationship, and this is how like the agent is like embedded in the world. And so like this, basically this is a way of doing kind of like on the cheap, like embodied cognition. Even like some principles from like soft robotics can kind of be at play too, in terms of like kinematics of what's in the world. So it's like, actually working with robots is very onerous. But like in this environment, like it's like you can just a very efficient implementation of fundamental principles of life. That, and then what I want to focus on first. So it's just, it's so cool. Basically, that's what.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you, Adam. I also just wanted to make everyone aware, or make you aware, Nick, that there's around 15 to 20 minutes left. So just
Great.
because I'm aware that Hongju also has
Yeah.
a presentation prepared, I don't know the content and the relation, but yeah, just so you guys are aware.
Yeah. I'll just quickly go through last things to give the pictures and then move over to Hongju. Yeah. So we got this. I'll do this one last part is the just you can picture this sort of this multi-scale thing going on too. So you can have multiple of these creatures interacting together, holding objects. You can imagine zooming in, they're actually made of cells that are cooperating. Zooming in, those cells are in fact made of molecules that are cooperating. And there's a certain, I have ideas for how to do this. Basically, like, it's kind of a simplified cellular molecular dynamics thing, which is all just bouncing balls that are interacting in various ways that have different properties, like things that are more like DNA molecules that are creating informational things that are more like having some closure for being able to synthesize all the pieces of it, and something like being able to absorb food molecules and create little food particles. So that's another picture of like, okay, you can start from something which is like cooperation at the level of creatures down to these beings actually be made of multiple cells, and those cells individually being made of kind of molecules. So that's sort of the another dimension of these things there. And and I think the main other thing would just be, we can go into this why 2D is a choice. And there's various reasons I think 2D is enough for a bunch of things. And like you can kind of have an environment that's where with gravity, you can have it be big and you can still have various interesting properties. But circles can also be balls. So there's a very analogous version of this that's all 3D. So, but I will stop here and move over to Hongju. And yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. Let's have Hongju now.
Awesome. Let me share the screen of mine. Okay, so sharing, right? Just wanted to double check. Great.
Yep.
Okay, so let me start. Okay, hello, this is Hongju. Thank you for inviting me. It indeed is a great honor to have the opportunity to present my work to all of you. So the title of my session talk is Exploring Embodied Adaptive Behavior Through Evolutionary Computation and Phenomenological Insights from a Consciousness-Inspired Perspective. So, well, a brief introduction of me would be, so I am a recent PhD graduate from UC Irvine Neurorobotics Lab. So I've been studied how we could study subjective consciousness in a way of empirical science, where I have been mostly involving integrated information theory, IIT's approach, trying to incorporate their measure of phi in various simulation studies. And also, I am generally very deeply interested in studying subjective consciousness using the research method of computational neurophenomenology, where the root cause of studying consciousness is to align humans and the benefits of technology, including artificial intelligence, in the most humane way as possible. So this presentation will actually contain 3 big topics of research. I'm not quite really sure if I could really cover up all of these contents because, well, it would probably take about 45 minutes, 15 minutes each, as at least 15 minutes to get reached for each topic. So anyways, let's see how it goes. So for the Oh, and by the way, before I really delving into the topic, just please let me know if you want to like speak something else, or you have any questions regarding clarification on the presentation material. Just let me know and just briefly uh, interrupt me, because it's quite tricky to figure out who has which question when I'm delivering this through
Yep.
Yeah.
No worries. I have an eye on anyone raising their hands and stuff, which
Right.
Adam is
Right.
at the moment. So, Adam?
Hi, yeah. So, so there's a collaboration happening right now with me and Nick and Hongju and others, who are basically, so Nick's simulation environment is being used as like this testing ground and technological artifact we're developing for testing a lot of different theories. And so Hongju's work, which we're not going to have as much time for because it's very deep and exciting, basically the intersection of IAT and the free energy principle. Like there's like, I've had notions about this over the years, and Hongju's actually gone in and similar to like Peter's work, like really like explored like what's there. And so one of the things, so she'll present this, both like the work that has been done, but also one of the things we're going to be doing is actually testing out these ideas in silico using this environment. And that's it.
Thank you. Thanks for the context. Yeah.
Thanks, Adam, for providing context. Yes. Okay, so the first topic would be the theory work, basically regarding phenomenology-based framework for consciousness research. So from here, I will introduce how we could integrate 4 major theories of consciousness by my proposed framework, which is based on the conscious properties discovered through phenomenological investigation. And also, I would like to show potential touch point with the alife simulation study that Nick has just introduced. Thank you, Nick, along with touch points with Adam's world model theory too. And so the second and third topic would be basically the computational simulation work. So which would be very different from just the theory work, which would be the first part. I would say these are an early endeavor toward realizing computational neurophenomenology. So where basically I play around by applying measures that are proposed by theory of consciousness, where such artificial agents behave accordingly regarding certain environmental interaction. The second topic, well, I would just like to give a brief explanation of the second and third topic. The second topic would be integrated information and genetically evolved brain-bird vehicles. Here I figure out how the integrated information differs in different behaviors of brain-bird vehicles obtained through genetic evolutionary algorithm. And the third topic would be an essentially further extended study of it. So here I measure both integrated information and the predictions appraisal in GA evolved animates while assigning them into more complex tasks that requires adaptive behavior rather than reactive ones. Okay, so here we go. So let me introduce a phenomenology-based framework that could potentially reconcile debating theories of consciousness. So let me very briefly introduce phenomenology. I argue phenomenology is important in doing the science of consciousness because consciousness essentially is an umbrella term. So it is important to discuss what exactly is the conscious phenomena that we are interested in and want to describe. And I argue conscious phenomena is not just qualia, or not just awareness, but every aspect of the entity of the experience. So basically, phenomenology is a philosophical view that begins with phenomena, which is the living experience as given. So taking the experience as given means we should analyze the experience as itself, rather than instead of pre-implying anything before the existence of our experience. So for conscious agents, the experience is equal to the world, and it is not, which is not something that should be described through external framework. So this intuition is from the discovery that the first person view always exists before the objective view, which means that we cannot essentially escape from the first person view no matter what we do. And here, intentionality, which would be the very core topic on regarding phenomenological methodology. Intentionality means that every conscious experience is constructed through the first personal attitude and situation. So, for example, we are in a pessimistic attitude, like half-filled cup of water would be seen as half of the water has gone. The difference, which while under optimistic attitude, it would be seen as half of the water is left. So this difference really results in totally different quality of experience, as we all know, since our experience cannot really escape from intentionality. Specifically, phenomenology by itself explains the embodied nature of mind, I would say, through always starting from the experience itself. So this also plays very huge significance to emphasize phenomenological discoveries when studying consciousness. And here's the brief ways on how we can do phenomenology. Most important step here, I would say, would be bracketing out, or epoche. Through bracketing out, we suspend any judgments we have towards the objects of interest. This could be understood as recognizing one's own intentional quality towards the matter, the objects of interest. So that is recognizing, do I like or dislike or am indifferent toward certain objects of interest. After that, eidetic reduction takes the place, which means basically generalizing the objects of interest. For instance, generalizing what is it like or dislike or being indifferent. Then validation and corroboration among the subjective individuals happen next, or even neurobiological discoveries could take place jointly in the part of the part of the investigation, which process would be known as neurophenomenology. Finally, researchers can discover intrinsic and general properties of consciousness through applying these methods. And this is the framework that I propose, which is built upon the properties discovered through phenomenological research methods that I just introduced. So this diagram illustrates a conscious agent finding themselves in a lab environment and spotting a half-filled glass of water, which is their current focus of intention, while on one hand perceiving it under a pessimistic point of view, and on the other hand perceiving it under optimistic point of view. So this different point of view is depicted as different intentional quality, which gives rise to different conscious experience. Left side and right side would be different conscious experience, while having the same objects as the intentional matter, which is half-filled cup of water. Here, specifically, each conscious experience A, B, and C is also different to one another, depending how much this agent is deeply interacting with the environment. So if the agent is closely interacting with a cup of water, like holding onto the glass and observing it, or drinking the water even, that experience would depict the cup of water with a much more vivid manner, and where it is quite graphically presented in this diagram. The vividity of the cup would when the agent does not interact such in a deep manner with the focus of attention, then the vividity would decrease or mix in towards within the agent's conscious experience. So here I point out 4 big properties of consciousness, which would be shown as from this slide that is shown 1 and 2, and next slide we have 3 and 4. These 4 big properties of consciousness would be, I would advocate for that those are the necessary properties that should be included and investigated through any theories of that intend to explain conscious phenomena. So the first would be pre-reflective self-acquaintance. This means every conscious individual recognize their own conscious experience as belonging to their own. So whatever experience it could be, the very experience always belongs to ourselves, not to some other person than I. Second is contextualized and environmentally situatedness. So basically, consciousness is a dynamic process of interpreting the surrounding environments. So this means this means our experience is rather relative than being absolute. So this would naturally lead to the third aspect, which would be spatio-temporal expandability. This points out that our conscious experience is something that is continuous and expandable with regard of surrounding environment, both in terms of spatially and temporally. So here, the conscious experience could be depicted as layered contour graph. More specifically, the contour surface of the diagram would be the conscious experience, where the putting bodily self or pre-reflective self-recognition as the very core. The last point would be volitional attention toward intentional matter, would basically describing agency. So conscious being those can apply reflective analysis to their own experience would inevitably possess the agency of shifting attention and apply selective attention under their own volition. So that is the focus of, that would be describing agency. So from now on, I will illustrate how the four mainstream theories of consciousness, which would be global workspace theory, Hardware theory, and we have also integrated information theory, and also active inference framework, which would be the coding theory I used, the terminology here, could be integrated all together under my framework, under this unified framework. So here, in terms of both global workspace theory and hardware theory, they are all interested in how such focus of attention becomes aware. That is, how could this half-filled cup of water could become intentional matter of our conscious experience in multiple different ways. Specifically, global workspace theory would focus on the representation of access consciousness as intentional matter, while hardware theory would focus on transitive consciousness, which is about how such intentional matter comes to mind. So these theories could be included within this unified framework as giving explanation toward a relationship between the focus of attention and intentional matter. However, while IIT's focus is on the conscious experience itself, which could be understood as focusing on the surface layers of each contours from this framework. So rather than solely giving focus towards some specific intentional matter, instead IIT's focus is on the experience in general. So it could be depicted as the contour surface of this framework. And lastly, predictive coding theory, predictive processing theory gives explanations on how the interaction between the agent, which is rising from the bodily self-acquaintance, and the environment shapes such kind of conscious experience. So for instance, different shape of intentional matter, even sharing the same intentional quality, might be explained through different degree or depth of interaction toward the environment, according to predictive coding theory, which as well, both explananda are included within this framework while not making necessary conflicts with each other, even considering the explananda of global workspace theory and hardware theory, which would be the intentional matter. So this would be the conclusion slide. In conclusion, I would like to assert that we need a more inclusive empirical study of consciousness that covers its entire explanandum, like this. So I have shown that current mainstream theories of consciousness can effectively coexist without critical conflicts necessarily happening within a wider framework like this. So if we aim for a wider definition of consciousness, which is actively supported by phenomenological discoveries, after all, different theories of consciousness can be integrated, and they should be, rather than competing one another. So, all right, so this would be the future research direction.
Sorry, just to interrupt you briefly. Adam, is there something you wanted to say? I saw a hand up and then hand down a couple of times, so just
I
checking.
guess I wasn't sure, just for to make some connections for people that could be helpful. So like there's a lot of so how do you get to so subjective experience, for instance, like there's both like the theory of this and like what are the essential features of consciousness, but then and the approach of from phenomenology qua experience, but also like, is there a function also? And so there's an interesting question of functionalism here in terms of like, they're both like, there's what it's like, but also the what it's likes might also point to useful data structures or useful cybernetic principles or active inference, ways of minimizing your free energy. And so the the ray tracing thing, like for a subjective point of view, like, so there's some theories of consciousness based on, like, for instance, projective geometry and really emphasizing like the point of view, or earlier presenting like Hunter was mentioning like like the affective nature, the valence nature of consciousness. And so that like Mark Solms type models, like that could also be implemented, like give it like a a brainstem like attention mechanism that's like basically responsive to like the overall like organismic cybernetic entropy, like the overall free energy, and then like adjusting moment to moment the precision weighting based on that. Like these are the kinds of things we could do. So like in like the work Hunter does, like in integrating these theories, like, so both showing in like using Bradenberg vehicles, like showing ways, like, for instance, systems might both be like free energy minimizing systems, and also like fee, and the way that relates to things like like the fee of the networks that are used to control them, exploring that intersection, doing that also in this context, like looking at ways that which different theories of consciousness make different claims, different bets on what's important or not. And now we do it in silico, and that's so there's a few connections.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. I was also just wondering, is the in silico work going to be presented in the next two parts of the presentation?
So yes, exactly. Actually, that portion would be much more of the future collaboration plan, I would say, because those two simulation works would be not as, I would say, not as full-fledged computational neurophenomenology yet, but it is indeed in that direction. So yeah,
Okay.
I think we
Wonderful.
we can discover more through
Okay.
my talk.
So I remember you saying that the next two parts would be around 15 minutes each, but I just wanted to make
Yeah.
you aware that there's around only 10 minutes left, just so we don't go completely over the time that we've carved out. So yeah, perhaps like more of a summary like presentation rather than going through the details of each slide would be great.
Sure.
But of course you do as you're comfortable with.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let me actually finalize this part, because we have only 2 slides left, and anyways, I really wanted to focus on the first topic, this theory work, anyways. So we can just skim through the topic 2 and 3 real quick. So as Adam just pointed out, I see this framework could be realized through many different dimensions, like including simulation work, or also more concrete, gain a more concrete form as a full-fledged theory, hopefully. So what I see as the future direction would be basically doing computational phenomenology by applying the phenomenological discoveries and modeling the artificial agents. Like, for instance, intentionality could work as hyperprior as of agents' behavior, and where bodily sensation naturally lead to preflective self-acquaintance, and agents' world model would naturally expand spatial-temporally, and so on. So I can see simulating agents with agency can be done by simulating the environment surrounding the agents by using evolutionary or open-ended algorithms. Importantly, I would like to emphasize that this could be extended to the social dimension, which means that social context is a part of the environmental context. So that we can mix in the touch points with the AI or even agent. I personally use agent alignment to include both AI and human agent alignment here. So I believe this really implies a huge significance on agent alignment, which would likely which can is specifically in terms of we can approach social values like benevolence, empathy, and altruism as aligned through the social context that really act as the environment of the agent. So okay, so basically the first bullet point from this slide really links my work organically to Adam Safran's work, which is integrated environment modeling theory, IWMT. As this also attempts to integrate across multiple theories of consciousness, including those four that I just pointed out through my previous slides. I can see this happening by incorporating phenomenological key features of conscious experience into the framework of IWMT. And also I'm interested in computationally realizing those key features and structures where I think the core mechanisms from IWMT, which would be the self-organizing harmonic modes, could be very useful because from IWMT, the outputs of conscious experience are explained through GWT or Fourier principle perspective, while generative process of such experience is captured by IIT's notion. So on top of that, spatio-temporal expandability can be applied within social structures as well. So this consciousness framework under phenomenological reference also goes well along with Nick's alife game project. So if we go more deeper with potential of alife game simulation idea regarding the topic of consciousness, by the way, these are just my humble ideas. From my viewpoint, I believe that this can be considered as part of the process of applying IWMT within a simulated environment. Also, specific details of implementation, further discussion with Nick would be necessary. One of the important discovery from the phenomenological perspective is that consciousness is essentially the never-ending interaction between bodily self-acquaintance and the surrounding environment. So I believe behavioral simulation should really start from the environment, not from the agent. And from the alife simulation, artificial agents with distinct modalities are introduced where their behaviors are adapted within certain environmental context. So for example, so if we use genetic evolution algorithm or open-ended algorithm, which I have been grown close through my previous research experience anyways, we can let the agents adapt within the environment without hard coding their behaviors. Also, as far as is computationally feasible, designing agent structures similar to self-organizing harmonic modes would make a solid connection to IWMT as well. So last bullet point here I would like to emphasize is about agent-user interaction in the gaming environment. So since the alife simulation inherently is a gaming environment, which means users would very likely influence agent behaviors in such enjoyable, which is non-task driven setting, which would be very interesting to see. And we can, track the real-time role model evolution in agents to also could be linked to supporting IWMT as the alignment theory. And also, this would be also just the future, the potential here, which would be exploring augmented reality integration for much more deeper dimension of pro-social alignment could be also possible to see. So that would be it regarding the first topic, which would be the theoretical part. So I would say from now on, we have really small time lapse. So I will just really briefly skim through all of the slides here. So from here, this would be the first simulation work that I tried to integrate the evolutionary agents that are derived from the evolutionary algorithm, and together with the context of information measures from the proposed through the theories of consciousness, which would be integrated information theory. So here I measured the phi or phi, the value of integrated information in the genetically evolved Brinkenberg vehicles. So I use the Brinkenberg vehicles to capture the biologically inspired design, because most of the research regarding integral value of integrated information have been somewhat arbitrary, I would say, unfortunately, because they were more tend to focus on the capture of the integrated information as a novel measure of the novel invented measure. So somehow I wanted to enhance the biological plausibility, so I chose genetically evolved Brinkenberg vehicles in this study. And here the core question was, would phi be related with functional behaviors that are intended by evolutionary algorithm? So I'll very skip through these. This would be the neural network of agents. Here, I use the connection weights of these neural network as the gene of the evolutionary algorithm. So evolution constraint, and here this would be the evolved agent, which would be the vehicle 2B. So the vehicle 2B would be closing toward the light, and as it gets closer, it should accelerate. So here we can see that it goes much more faster than from the beginning. So we can see that the agent is performing well as intended. And this would be also the full evolution rate results, fitness graph and trajectory plot shown together. So this would be 2A, vehicle 2A, which moves away from the light, and also 3B moves away, and 2B and 3A move toward the light. And also we can see the mean square error. So fitness, I use mean square error for the fitness function. So it gets lower for all vehicle types, which means evolutionary constraints are working well. Here is about the integrated information, the backstories of phi, and how I used it to calculate the integrated information. So basically, I use the activation data of the neurons and binarize it to get the transition probability, because the phi, the integrated information, is all about the difference between or I would say transition probability from state t0 to t+1. So to get the transition probability, I basically counted all of the possible states from this activation data and put into the TPM, and I specifically use pi from this simulation to calculate phi, because we had only 4 nodes, so it was computationally it was computationally possible too. And this would be the result of change of phi over evolution. So interestingly, for all vehicle types, so vehicle 2A, 2B, 3A, and 3B, phi decreased as generation increased. So here we wanted to see if the neuronal activation might be optimized as the agent's behavior gets optimized. So this is shown from this slide, the t-SNE plot of connection weights under low generation, 100, and high generation 1000 by vehicle type and the level of phi, where high would be red and medium as green and low as blue. Here we can spot the evolution indeed led the agent to converge on specific genes. So if we can see the we had multiple red spots from the low generation plot, but only have one single red spot from the high generation plot. So I have been concluded that this could be interpreted as behavior becoming more stereotype and accurate might have been leading phi value to decrease. So that's basically the conclusion to wrap up. And this last topic would be basically serve as the extended study of the previous topic that is called information integration and prediction appraisal in adaptive agents. So here I will use integrated information measure and capture the phi, but not directly the phi itself, but the approximation of phi, specifically focus on the info max or maximizing the information intrinsic to the system, focusing on that property. And also I would compare that with predictions appraisal, which is also, well, a measure introduced from different theories of consciousness than IIT. And here, adaptive agents means I basically set up more complex environments to induce more adaptive behaviors rather than reactive ones. So here, again, the core question would be, does inducing high phi and low appraisal would grant certain effect on evolution algorithm-driven agent behavior? So as the agent of actually extension of the previous study, brain-bird vehicle simulation work, from this study, I also keep the notion of behavior chosen or induced through environment, rather than not by hard coding into the agents itself. So this means basically I would use genetic evolution algorithm to get the agent behavior. Here specifically, I simulate the behavior of I would say an animal in the middle of the food chain, which is called forager. So this forager would move toward green, so forage toward the green objects, which is its prey, while avoiding the red objects, which indicates danger or its natural predator. So again, I use the same environment, which called weebots, to simulate. Not just here, important difference from the previous study would be not just measuring phi, but I also compare compare with appraisal, which would be different type of information measure, and two, not just only passively measuring these values from resulting activation data, I actively induce them to increase through the evolutionary sequence by introducing them inside the fitness function of the formula of GA. So we use we use this multi-objective fitness function, which would be environmental context and infomax property. This would be phi approximation, and prediction appraisal minimization, all combined as linear way, and will compare different composition under different ratios. And this would be slightly different neural network settings. Again, the connection of the connection weight of each of this neural network is set as genome of the GA. And evolution settings, fitness function composition. So, well, let's see. So the basic backbone would be this linear combination, and I compare five. Well, actually there was five, but three main different composition was used through this study. So one would be only using environmental context. Well, it includes the green scoring and red penalty, while also penalizing the idleness. And together with environmental components, I introduced infomax property and also predictions appraisal, and where the ratio with the ratio of 4:1 or 2:1, where 4 and 2 would be environmental context and 1 would be each measure of interest. Yeah, the phi approximation. Since calculating phi would require a lot of computational power, especially to incorporate in real-time fitness function. So I follow this approximation method, and also I prepared the animation slides, but we're lacking time, so I'll just skip through that. Just let me know if you want me to revisit after my presentation. And also this would be predictions appraisal calculation. So I believe most people in this group would be much more expert than me. So I'm very humble at introducing my approach on measuring this predictions appraisal. But I believe appraisal can be defined as information transmission or loss of information between actual observance versus predicted observation. So I formalized it as negative log likelihood of observed states when having certain prediction of states. So this means current states of hidden layer will predict the future states of input layer. And I actualize this by fitting the robust regression by using Huber loss function as the loss function. And also I wanted to note that I understand that this may be different from the orthodox method of applying appraisal, because this does not involve any variational base or stepwise action optimization. But I would say this approach would be more of resembling a simplified active inference on genetic timescale, to be specific, in terms of evolving agents under selection pressure for lower appraisal is developing improved predictive models. And again, this would be an animated process of appraisal calculation.
I am just going to make you aware that there's just like, I want there to be enough time for a Q&A and stuff as well. So just, if you can find a spot close by that we can stop at, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. So let me just really quick, just show the results. So this would be behavioral example of best so far agent. So we can see that it is approaching the green, and also around 40 seconds, we can see that it is also backing up from the red. So it's working well. And so for the results, I have 3 big results, and this shows the changes of the measure of interest of phi and with evolutionary convergence. So we see that past convergence happens around 110th generation. Phi remains almost not changing. So blue is this where only environmental components were used, and green is where phi is included, and red is when appraisal is included. So it doesn't really shows a big difference, while the appraisal actually show gradually closest to 0 with all of the sorts of evolutionary conversions, and respectively, interestingly, the trajectory is very similar to the time series of this environmental fitness also. And second result with this mean environmental fitness difference in terms of early generation convergence speed, it was much more faster when the phi and appraisal were included than just using environmental context. And this also can be seen as this box plot graph notes that difference. And I will just skip the behavior and compare regarding using, this would be the third and the last, comparing other ratios of fitness function composition. 4:1 ratio shows the fastest convergence, where the light green is phi when including phi 2:1, and the light red is appraisal. So it seems like at least some portion of environmental components is required for convergence. And that was it. End of my talk. Many thanks for your participation, and also sorry if it too much elongated in some point.
Thank you so much. Can we just have everybody please unmute and maybe turn on your cameras and just give Nick and Hongju a round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Oh, hey, Peter.
Hey, Rudy.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I totally understand that even I put a lot of pressure on you for like just the second half of the presentation, but it's such interesting content that you have presented that I almost feel like it warrants another TNB session in itself, just to go into the nitty-gritty details of all of the things that you've talked about and the calculations. And there were quite a few terms that were thrown around, so it would be good to like have an in-depth presentation about that. But let's first open up the floor for a Q&A. So first I'll have Adam.
Hi, and thank you. And yeah, we there's like too much content to squeeze in, and we partially because we're about to be applying for funding opportunities and we're about to make some decisions, we wanted to get feedback sooner rather than later. So sorry for overburdening the meeting, but one just comment was so like I just found like I find Hongju's work to be so exciting, and like this and so the idea is like to keep going with it and to do it you know, in this new context using the simulation environment. And one issue was like that came up was like, what are the best ways of evaluating free energy? What are the best ways of like evaluating integrated information validly? So in Hongju's work, like there was like using like the canonical full computations that are like correct for phi, but actually for as we scale this, that's not going to be tractable, and so we'll be forced to be using like integrated information like approximations. But similarly, like you know, input from you in terms of like if you're going to like measure surprisal and have this really speak to, you know, the free energy principle and active inference in the most principled way, like what is the best way of doing it? And so that's where we defer to you as the experts on that. But and so that's so this challenge of basically as we move forward with it, how do you actually implement it in a way so this environment has the virtue of being scalable, but there's only so much we can do. And so one thing we can't do is like full integrated information calculations. But what we would want to do is like evaluating like free energy, expected free energy, generalized free energy in the most valid and principled way possible. And that's where we would like need guidance. So anyway, so that's enough for me.
Yeah, and it was really important context as well, just to say that you are applying for a grant as well. So if you also have any specific questions, I know you've already mentioned one, but if you have any other specific questions related to the grant application and how certain feedback and stuff will be helpful to you, then please do just share that.
Thank you.
Yeah. But does anybody have a response to Adam that they would like to give?
I actually do.
Yeah, go on.
Which was why I raised my hand in the first place. Or a response maybe is enough said, but or a lot to say, but at least some thoughts on it. Also, just wanted to say thanks for the presentation. So obviously this is exciting and so many things going on. So I can't respond to. I can't even remember all of it, unfortunately. But I wanted to specifically say something about this question of how to get the surprisals out. Also because, as Adam knows, I did a project earlier myself where we made some animats do some much simpler task and calculated phi on them, and then we wanted the surprise and we wanted to relate them to each other, and we ended up with kind of an approximation, an empirical approximation to that. And something we discussed then, and which I thought is one approach here, is something like a computational psychiatry style cognitive modeling approach, where you take the behavior of your animat and you fit an active inference model to it as if it was a person. And you use that to do parameter inference, and then you get out the surprises or the free energies, or actually whatever from that model you would like, implied in that animat's behavior, at least. And to me, I think that's probably, I mean, as long as there's no formal way of inferring the surprise just analytically from the blanket states or from the input from the internal states or something, then I think this would be the next best way. So of course, you have so complex and interesting games that you make them play that making an active inference model that does exactly that and then fitting it might be complicated. But that's kind of a second task. Does that make sense, what I'm saying at all?
I mean, I'll chime in quickly. Makes a lot of sense, and also is, I think, one of the more exciting directions. So it's like both, like you have like a ground truth of like affect, and affect as like some sort of read on like how well you're doing as a being, and so it's like, so there's like a validity to it, but also in terms of like one of the more exciting applications is like using these both as scientific instruments, but also potentially as therapeutic tools. And so you're already there, basically close to digital twins and computational psychiatry. So I think it's like multiple birds in one stone in terms of both providing like an access to a highly valid ground truth. And one of the more exciting things that we'd like to do is basically develop this into being a way of basically aligning the people who interact with it. And also, so in terms of like alignment, so it's like the original like idea that like Nick was having was basically incorporating all these different alife principles for this multi-agent environment and seeing how you can adjust their alignment in terms of like getting them to sing from the same hymn sheet, getting into like a harmonious social coordination. But also there's other alignment of like with the people interacting with it. And in terms of, and so like that approach, I think actually we definitely we should talk more about that, because I think that's one of the more exciting directions among the many directions to go, and it seems like it addresses a lot of the issues.
So so it has limitations also, specifically this cognitive modeling approach of inferring the types of parameters that an agent must have had given its behavior, which is primarily that they need to behave in a way that's informative about the parameters. And yeah, but we can talk about that. So it's the same. The other paper you probably saw, Adam, apropos alignment with the multi-skill stuff, did that same thing, just to some simulated whatever. I'll be happy to talk about that. I think the main bottleneck is to actually make and fit a model that can do the type of behavior that your interesting tasks include. As a cognitive modeler, I'm used to button presses in front of computers by people, and so walking around in a little 3D world is already impressive to me. Also, it's really nice to see you, Adam, and it's nice to meet you, Nick and Hongju. Yeah.
Oh, and also I was actually curious. So the Peter that you mentioned that before about cognitive modeling. So I would say I use fitness function. Well, obviously I just changes the slide to the fitness function here. So one of the caveats or pitfalls while using this fitness function would be that basically no matter what I specify the movements by introducing this environmental context on how to perform about the behavior of the agent, and it's quite it can be seen somewhat unnatural in terms of even if I am using the evolutionary algorithm to be specific here, but still the evolution should not have any ending points or any fitness score to be scored in natural habitat in some sort. But technically, when we have to propose such fitness function to get certain behavior, get certain behavioral traits at least. So yeah, that would be one thing I just wanted to mix in if we are trying to model more open-worlded simulation in terms of more agentic interaction and more natural ways on alignment and so on. Yeah. Oh, Peter, you're muted.
Peter, you're saying something. Okay.
I don't want to take too much time, so maybe I'll just say one thought that came up in relation to this, and we could talk later. I'd be happy to do that. But it's just this thought that you simulate little animats or agents, and you do some evolutionary algorithm to with a loss function that essentially removes them if they don't behave in a specific type of way, right? And if you can have some very complex loss function, and then they start behaving in some intelligent way that looks like active inference. But the trouble, at least I ran into, is that we don't know the generative model that a given agent uses because we didn't build it. So in machine learning, normally we just build an agent with a specific generative model and we know it. And because we know that, we can calculate the surprise and so on. And we know the parameters, the A matrices and whatever. But here we don't. And so that's why my impulse, because I'm trained in cognitive science as a cognitive modeler, is to treat that little machine in the same way we treat a person, because in both cases we have some system that behaves in a way that looks like active inference, but don't know the generative model. And
yes.
There's plenty of ways to do that, and so the MATLAB code has ways of doing that. PyMDP now can do it, although I think it's still in an experimental stage, the JAX code, and I haven't tried it. And of course, the Julia package can also do it, although it's limited in some ways. But so that would be my impulse to say, I don't know the generative model of this agent, but it acts in a way where it seems likely that it had this generative model with these parameters.
I see. Yeah, I see. And now I get your point. Yeah.
And so, of course, the type of loss function you're going to use is going to shape what types of generative models these agents are going to act as if they have.
Right. So a totally different type of simulation, I think. Yeah. So here I didn't use some sort of simulation that involves the Markov decision process or Markovic, chain relations specifically in the agent itself, the neural network, or just the network, the system of the agent itself. So yeah, that would be a totally different thing that I started from modeling the behaviors where the typical active inference framework where they won't do that way, so approach that way. So yeah.
Right. And maybe you can think that you have the brain, so the implementation level simulated in your animats.
Oh yeah, so actually
but the computational level or the Bayesian belief updating over a generative model that would be, let's say, implemented by that brain, we don't have access to, and so we need to get it from somewhere. And the best trick I have is to get it from the behavior. Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
But I'll shut up before too much time is taken.
So I was just wondering, would it not be a simple enough scenario to actually create the generative model ourselves as well? Especially with the approach green, avoid red, right? And so you would have a much more malleable and at least explainable model that you understand yourself, rather than just kind of playing around with a black box sort of scenario. And that could be helpful to understand what each and every component is also doing and contributing. But it also depends on and so Nick, the setup that you've created, does that use Python?
Oh, so I haven't made it yet, but yeah, it would use Python, or there would be Python bindings for it. I think the implementation would be in Rust, but you would be able to do the import a package and use it in the nicely from Python. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, on that note, I had a very quick comment, and especially since you just said that it's not actually implemented yet, is Animal AI, which is another software that it uses a 3D environment though, but it also has agents that use different animals like rats and not rats and other objects and things like that. It also has a physics-based understanding of the different components. It's called Animal AI, and it's by Lucy Cheek in Cambridge. She's been developing all of this, and so what you can do is kind of put in a learning model or learning algorithm in there. For example, active inference, which is something that her and I will probably collaborate on doing in the near future, but that is also something that you could look into in terms of potential collaboration or ideas as to how we can actually implement this. But yeah, it is different in terms of the conceptual visions that you had in terms of the different senses, and it mainly being a 2D environment rather than 3D. But yeah, something to look into.
Thank you. I'll take a look.
Yeah. Peter?
Do I have time for a last thought, really?
Yeah.
You can tell me no.
I'm gonna go 4 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because you've now simulated agents using little animate brains, right? Some neural networks, and you've done evolutionary algorithms on top of that to make them do the right thing. And as really said, in a way that's a shame, because then we don't really know what computations it does. So why not use an actual active inference model instead? And you'll probably have to do evolutionary algorithm on that, perhaps, depending if you want this change in fitness and so on. But you can do that, although I don't actually know who does evolutionary algorithms on active inference models, but I that should be doable in one way or another. The problem I ran into, basically, you can either start with something that fits IIT really well, and then you have to work a bit harder to get the active inference perspective, or you can start from active inference, but then you have to work harder to get the IIT out. So the question that I didn't at the time, I wasn't at the time able to solve, which is, it was just me and a while ago, so that might be solvable, but is how do you get phi out of the internal states of an active inference model? And the problem is that active inference models usually are not these nice little discrete state neural networks that phi calculations fit so well with. So you'll have some way to discretize the beliefs in the, so you take out the, somehow discretize the beliefs inside the active inference model and make a TPM out of that and then calculate phi from that. It's doable.
Wait, sorry. Are you suggesting active inference doesn't have discrete states?
The beliefs of an active inference agent about the environment are not discrete. They're probability distributions.
Yeah. Okay.
But those are the ones you would want to calculate phi from, and phi likes very simple things, at least in the when I did it last time. So if you could find some way to take these probability distributions, these beliefs, and make them into some discrete things and do a TPM, you could calculate phi from that.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think the question is
interesting approach. Thank you. Really, really appreciate that. Yeah.
And I think the question is which of the two ways is the least bothersome. And because I'm better at doing cognitive modeling with active inference models, I would start with a thing that's easy to do with phi and then do cognitive modeling on that. But you know phi things much better than I do, so maybe you have some good way of discretizing and approximating phi, for example, and so on. Yeah, that was my last thought for now.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. Anybody else have anything to say? You have 3 minutes. It's actually not a hard 3 minutes, so you can have 5 if you want, but yeah. No? Okay. If not, then I'm going to give the floor to Carl. So you have another 10 seconds to raise your hands up. Okay, that was probably 3 seconds, but Carl, let's go.
And how long do I have?
Around half an hour.
Half an hour. Excellent. Okay, so I'll speak quickly. Yeah, a very rich series of presentations and excellent discussion, and I think has really intimated when the applications have gone in and the future is clearer, we should sort of return to the last part of the second presentation and just drill down on the details. But I'm going to focus quickly on things that might be useful for shaping the pitch and or application, depending upon whether this is for industry or a funding for research that leverages all the interests and skills that the three people here possess and the ambitions. as practically and as simply as I can conceive it at the moment. So I'm going to be very polemic, run very, very quickly through this as if I was a scientific consultant under pressure. I'm not necessarily clear what I'm saying is correct, but this is what I would advise you to do in terms of drilling down on what you want to do and to implement it, or at least have a vision of how it can be implemented. And in order to convince either investors or reviewers that there is a reasonable probability of success in terms of that implementation, I think you need to recourse to the existing academic literature where a similar kind of thing has been done, at least in proof of principle or in a baby way. And certainly sort of Peter's work, for example, would be useful, and some of Hongju's previous publications will be useful points of reference. I'm going to, while you were talking, I've sort of gone through and tried to identify potentially useful papers in the service of picking out certain themes that might you might want to foreground. So I'll just start at the end. It seems to me that most of the agendas that could be met, if you can use Nick's alife game world to evolve active inference agents using the objective function that underwrites active inference, and then via the evolution of increasingly complex behavior that may involve interactions between agents, show that under this free energy minimizing process at all scales, phi increases. And I think that would be nicely showcase the utility of having an alife-like simulation with authentic agency. And by authentic agency, I mean simulated agents that plan into the future with counterfactual policies, speaking to Hongju's notion of what it is to be conscious, with her sort of central return to this notion of intentionality. And just thinking about what having an intention means. It means the consequences of my action, which is private to me, that I may or may not experience, but certainly it has to have the necessary attributes that it is my future, that I am authoring, and only I know about it, and it has meaning for me because it's all about me. So it seems that you're going to have to evolve agents that have this authentic agency. And under active inference, that's not difficult. That's just basically equipping the implicit generative model with the consequences of simple actions in the future. And then using planning as inference, the agents then evaluate the most likely kind of action they're going to commit to, given the kind of agent that they are. And the kind of agent that they are is inherited evolutionary from the epigenetic priors, or the priors in the evolutionary algorithm. You then have an evolution of active inference agents that will be cooperated and co-constructing their environment, and one can almost guarantee you're going to simulate emergent complexity from that, and your various conspecifics will survive and become increasingly complex, and thereby you can track either the path integral, by which I mean the total lifespan sum of surprisal or free energy. And remember, surprisal is just information theory, which is just a measure at this point in time. You need the path integral, the time integral. So you've now got an average of the self-information, which is just the entropy or the neg entropy. So we're back to Schrodinger and what is life here. So you're just measuring how lifelike this particular, or how adaptively fit this particular agent was, just by evaluating the negative log probability of that agent's sensory interactions or sensory states with the environment, conditioned on it being that agent, which of course entails that generative model. So you could also compute the free energy under the generative model, because once you know the generative model and you've got now a record of the approximate posteriors, the whole point of having that posterior is that you can now evaluate the free energy. So what I'm saying here is, I don't think this has been done before, but I'd be really interested in the results of this, is there are two ways of measuring adaptive fitness. You can either just measure the literally the path integral, or the integral over all the sensory exchanges of the agent, given it is that agent, which is just taking this particular agent as measuring the probability that it would have these particular experiences, given the kind of agent it is. And you know what the kind of agent it is because it's been equipped with a prior, which you've, say in your genetic code in the alife simulations. Or you can take the variational bound on that kind of surprisal, which would just involve the normal ways in which we compute the free energy and the free energy gradients that underwrite sense making and choice behavior. That will be the objective function. I think that takes a lot of confusion about, does it matter which objective function do I choose? So take, for example, the environmental stuff. Was this basically a specification of compliance with prior preferences of the agent? And then there was the mutual information, and then there was the predictive coding surprisal. Really, there's only one objective function, and that's adaptive fitness. Is how well does this generative model fit with her environment? And that is just scored by the model evidence, or the log of the model evidence, if you want, or the marginal likelihood, the probability that this agent, me, or given me as this agent, what's the probability that agents like me would have experienced what I have experienced? The probability of y given m. That marginal likelihood is adaptive fitness, which means that natural selection just is Bayesian model selection, because the adaptive fitness just is the marginal likelihood, which is also known as the model evidence. Therefore, Bayesian model selection on the basis of the model evidence, basically the negative surprise of all the data you've ever seen during a lifetime, is adaptive fitness. So I think just making that point, if you can make it more succinctly than I have just made, means that you don't have to worry about whether to sort of start off with IIT's right, and let's show that sort of free energy tracks it, or free energy is right, and that IIT somehow emerges as a correlate of that. You just mathematically define what adaptive fitness is in silico, and there's a large literature suggesting that that you can do that purely in terms of the model selection, either explicitly on the self-information or on its variational bounds. So there's some recent work actually, both from ourselves using variational free energy, but also thermodynamic free energy can be used as a formal quantification of adaptive fitness in the context of theoretical biology. So there's no argument about what it is to be as an agent, and assuming that to be conscious requires you to be an agent. As you grow agents of increasing adaptive fitness, then you are hoping to see that the phi will increase, I presume, and that should be fairly simple. I didn't fully understand Peter's worries about the Markov decision process. If I read it correctly, current versions of phi are basically just functionals of the transition probabilities. Is that correct? If that's the case, then all of the discrete state space active inference modeling using Markov decision processes will furnish you with exactly those probability transition tensors. That's where the discrete state space modeling, which I imagine that Nick is doing. Well, I may be wrong if he's got some homeostasis, but if you can cast the actual behaviors as categorical and discrete, moving from one state to another state, moving to the left or moving to the right or whatever, then the generative models used for active inference, cast as Markov decision processes, are fully specified in terms of the A and B matrices, where the A's are the likelihood mappings and the B's are the probability transition tensors. So, I would imagine, and furthermore, with the right mean field approximation, the size of those tensors, those transition matrices or tensors, I say tensor because there's a slice, there's a matrix slice for every possible policy or plan or choice that the agent makes. My point being here, though, just in terms of mathematical feasibility, should you be quizzed on this, is that the whole point of using variational free energy is that your approximate posterior is factorized. It carves nature at its joints. This means that the size of the B tensors are small. So you don't have one giant B tensor that would be difficult to compute phi from, I imagine. You'll have a collection of small ones that all interact in generating a prediction of the sensation, and in the context of agency, in exactly the way that Nick was describing, the interaction to generate a prediction of the proprioception or the equilibrium points and the set points for action can then be refilled, reflexively specifying how this agent actually moves, or secretes or does whatever it does. But the cause of that movement or secretion is going to be completely summarized in the transition, the dynamics of the different latent factors. So what I'm hoping is that you'll be able to design lots of little agents and evolve them. And it may well be that the number of factors and the number of states within the factor, the coarse grading of the factors, will itself be part of the genetic code that may itself evolve. So you get more and more complicated agents, possibly. Perhaps you don't need to go that far. But the hope is that you will be able to then generate active inference agents that are now composed of conditionally independent probability transition matrices that are all small. If that's the case, you may be able to use your pi-phi algorithm to evaluate phi for each of them, and then ask Julio how to add them together to make a global phi. I have no idea. But it strikes me that that kind of argument would be, I would find compelling if I was a reviewer of this and faced with the normal critiques. Yeah, phi is very, it's very pretty, but it doesn't have any application because you can't actually use it. Where you say, well, yes, you can. If you just think about the nature of actual artifacts that that minimize their complexity in the service of maximizing their model evidence. So, sorry for Nick. Log model evidence, i.e. the marginal likelihood or the adaptive fitness, is equal to accuracy minus complexity. And the complexity basically just scores the degrees of freedom in your generative model required to provide an accurate account of your data. And of course, you're constructing your data when some of those predictions are actually realized by actually acting. So there's adaptive fitness naturally puts a pressure on the complexity, which reduces the size of your tensors by the reduction in degrees of freedom, which means that in principle, it becomes more phi measurable in principle. So if you can pursue that argument, then I think you do have all the tech at hand in principle to actually do this and then just evolve agents under natural selection, which of course is just Bayesian model selection, to minimize the pattern of the variational free energy and all its interpretations, and then demonstrate that phi slowly increases from generation to generation. You might be lucky if you put sort of, it depends how far you want to go in sort of the simulated life. in active inference, there are 3 timescales over which you minimize variational free energy or maximize the model evidence, the marginal likelihood. There's moment to moment, each discrete time step of the alife simulation, and that will be the inference part, and that's basically updating beliefs in the spirit of things like Bayesian filtering and the like. And then every 200 or so time points, you sort of after lots and lots of sort of time point by time point, to get a feel for the average contingencies, you then update the parameters of the model in the spirit of continual learning. And that is a free energy minimizing process about not the states that are represented by the agent, but the contingencies and the laws and the transition dynamics and the likelihood mappings that constitute the agent. That can be made quite simple in discrete state space models, because you're just accumulating bean counts or Dirichlet counts. You just literally say, I've seen that happen and this happened and then this happened. And then you just put a bean count in the appropriate probability transition matrix, and you just accumulate experience literally by retaining your experience. And as you get older and wiser, you sort of build up bean counts and parts of the transition matrix. So it now acquires this complexity and this sparsity. And I would imagine, certainly if people are now saying that phi is just mutual information, it would definitely increase the mutual information. In this particular instance, between very much in the spirit of the information bottleneck and predictive information, the mutual information or the transfer neg entropy between cross entropy between the past and the future, the past and the present, or the present and the future. And so I can just see how, by switching on active learning as opposed to just vanilla active inference, you could get, even within the lifetime of a simulated agent, an increase in phi as she became more and more wise and more precise in her beliefs about the transitions from one state to the other state. And she is an agent because she is picking the right slice of these transition tensors in accord with the expected free energy. That, interestingly, just is exactly like your objective function, the mutual information minus the expected cost or surprisal. But in this instance, the surprisal or the cost is not based upon it's a subset, very much in the way that is probably the closest is in relation to the environmental conditions. So there are some very strong priors that the genotype specifies, which provide very precise constraints on certain variables, say the homeostatic variables that Nick was talking about. So I can be anything and do anything and see anything, feel anything, provided I'm within this band of temperature, and provided and so forth, I don't experience this degree of damage, and I have all of these things. So there's a subspace of outcomes, interoceptive usually outcomes, over which you have very, very precise priors. And those precise priors now mean that under those priors you can measure the expected probability of violating those priors, the surprise you would get if you violated those priors. And that's basically the expected cost. So the expected free energy is just the mutual information or the expected information gain minus the expected cost, which for you is just exactly as you had it, the mutual information plus the environmental conditions. It's the same thing. And I think that's nice because it means you can simplify things. You can say that this is all internally consistent. In the context of writing down a variational synthesis of natural selection in terms of Bayesian model selection, adaptive fitness now becomes marginal likelihood, or more specifically log marginal likelihood, that can be bounded by variational free energy. But we're talking about agents, and agents have to choose what to do, and they do that by choosing the action that minimizes the free energy bound expected given that action. That's known as expected free energy. Interestingly, the expected free energy can be expressed as mutual information or expected information gain minus the surprisal determined by an agent's priors, the kinds of things that define it in terms of its characteristic or essential variables, which it starts off with early on and then has to learn how to satisfy those constraints, possibly by interacting with other agents, building homes, whatever, depending on how if you can simulate the emergence of, say, niche construction, so that you start to get, the parents of one, or the parents of a new agent now teaching the old, the baby agent how to behave. That's doable. I'll give you an example of that in the literature in a very simple context of language. So if I'm born into a world where I see my parents responding and broadcasting their beliefs about various things, I can very, very quickly learn how to talk and to join in that conversation simply. And basically, I've now got a Bayesian mechanism for transgenerational communication of things that can be very encultured, like language and like sort of canoe making and that kind of thing. If you could simulate that, that would be wonderful, because then you've got the truly interactive, a sort of cultural aspect of everything at hand, and that would, I imagine, that massively accelerate the expression of phi, both within the lifetime of the individual as she became more and more conscious-like, but also generationally, transgenerationally, as this species became more and more managed its world in a sort of niche construction sense that also included this cultural aspect, which usually involves some degree of communication. And Nick, I do it through smell. I think that's a great way to, but smell with at least 8. I notice you have the 8 most loud sounds, but to avoid having all the tricky mechanics, even though clearly you've got lots of lovely GPUs, even so, I think you want a minimal kind of communication. And I'm just thinking from the point of view of people like Mike Levin, the way that cells actually communicate is by broadcasting a small number of signals that have a sort of 1 over R decay. So just to broadcast my belief state, for example, or where I am, or beliefs about where I am, you can probably get away with just by broadcasting smells or electrochemical gradients or something. So they don't have to be smelly things. They can be sort of bioelectric signaling as opposed to sound waves. And I think if you just have, say, eight of these, that would be perfectly sufficient for quite a high dimensional degree of communication between where I am, what state of mind I'm in, what I believe about things from my point of view, that something that have an aligned frame of reference could then meaningfully interpret and learn from you. And furthermore, it would be nice ultimately to show that this kind of communication and co-construction of an encultured sort through signaling, which you can reduce down to the level of sort of signaling among cells in an organ, right through to communication between institutions at a societal level, is an emergent property. And in principle, it is, and I'll very briefly show you one paper that demonstrates that to be true using numerical simulations. In this instance, just of 3 children shouting, playing hide and seek with their mother, and she's up to the right, she's to the left, or she's straight. At that really simple level, you can demonstrate that this alignment is an emergent property of maximizing adaptive fitness by maximizing model evidence, in the sense that the way to make the world as predictable as possible is just to have all of the conspecifics aligning their likelihood mappings, so that I can now predict what you're going to say, or going to say, or I can predict what I'm going to hear you say next, provided we have a shared generative model that's co-evolved together of our shared world, and also we have a shared and aligned likelihood model, so that when I produce a certain word, you can use your the same likelihood model to map from that word to the appropriate latent state or posterior belief. And that process just basically means you become more predictable. If you speak my language and I speak your language, together we can avoid uncertainty and minimize expected surprise and maximize beautiful information. So this is all just another way, another manifestation of this imperative to maximize the evidence from my model of the lived world, when my world includes things like me, which are basically you. So That would be really nice if you could demonstrate that. That goes hand in hand with, you know, an increase in phi. So that's where I'm coming from. What I'm going to do now, I'm deliberately not giving you a chance to talk because I just want to quickly go through the papers. I'm just going to quickly show you the papers I had in mind when making. Oh, who's going? Somebody waving goodbye?
No, we're waving to Nick's kid.
Oh, I see. So I didn't see that. Sorry, see heard on that. Right. Right, we're going to do some pretty pictures now. Where are we? Screen. Yeah. Let me actually go through in a sort of more helpful order. So this paper, no, not this paper. Where are we? My apologies. Oh, yeah. Before I go any further, it just strikes me that you might want to, this whole ambition. You know, basically synthetic consciousness and how to measure it, and what kind of software environments would be necessary to evolve and measure the emergence of consciousness. You might want to look at this institute that Joshua Bach is currently trying to get funding for and to set up in California, where I believe where you are. So I'm just putting this slide up. Sorry, this web page up just to alert you to the existence of this embryonic organization, which seems to be very aligned with some of the aspirations that you're interested in. So that's that. I thought that might be useful. Supervised structure learning. Well, let me go to this. So if you want to read about the maths of how to cast natural selection in the in terms of variational calculus and as Bayesian model selection, that folds in active inference by having a sort of scale-free approach to learning and inference and selection as different sort of aspects of self-evidencing or evidence maximization. This is a very dense paper, so I'm not inviting you to read it. What I'm saying is that you can usefully refer to this as an existence proof that there are formulations of evolution that are cast in the calculus of belief updating and learning, and specifically active inference and learning and selection as Bayesian model selection, which stands in for natural selection. And a particular instance of that, so that's a variational synthesis written with Daniel Friedman and friends in 2023. A particular aspect of that was oh no, it's something else. Was its application to the emergence of language or communication or signaling or broadcasting beliefs in a multi-agent setting. So again, I'm not inviting you to read this paper, but it is potentially a useful thing to cite if you want to say that it is possible to simulate the emergence of communication through the alignment of generative models, and in particular the likelihood mapping between the belief states of an agent and their communicative behaviors, simply by applying the principle of maximizing the evidence for models of any lived world when that world is shared by a number of similar artifacts. And interestingly, this goes on to actually try to measure and demonstrate the emergence over generations, or time in this instance. Is it time, or I think this might be a developmental, neurodevelopmental time? The emergence of this likelihood mapping. So now we're not talking about the probability transitions, we're talking about the mapping between the belief states of the agent and what the agents hear, or indeed in this instance also actually say, in the sense that that all the agents just generate, they're all shouting at the same time, and very much like Nick was implying by taking the strongest or the most precise auditory inputs, then the person who has the most precise beliefs about their beliefs shouts the loudest. But at the beginning, they're not aligned. So when they're all born into the world, they're just not aligned and they're all shouting nonsense. But over time, simply by minimizing variation-free energy or maximizing the bound on the marginal likelihood or adaptive fitness at a developmental or learning timescale, they become, these likelihood mappings now become aligned, and thereby evince this increase in mutual information in exactly the way that I think you were hoping to reproduce and indeed have demonstrated. There's maybe an interesting link between the structural complexity of I think it was these likelihood mappings, I'm pretty sure it was the likelihood mappings here, and phi as evinced by other measures of complexity of these likelihood mappings that you could apply to the transition, the probability transition matrices that underwrite the belief updating in response to hearing, seeing your mother and hearing your sisters shouting at you. So that may be, I repeat, a useful proof of principle that you could leverage if you wanted to pursue this. One sort of, just to emphasize this point, the point being made in this paper, supervised structure learning, is this interesting association between the expected free energy. Yes. So I'm just using this as an example of a paper that you could refer to say that what I am going to do next, as scored by the free energy that I expect consequent upon an action. So this is the thing that defines agency. Can be expressed as a mutual information minus an expected cost. So in this instance, your Y's become O's. So the mutual information is now just the mutual information between the latent causes or states of affairs in the world and the observable outcomes in the future, which is why it's a mutual information as opposed to an information gain. Minus the probability, the expected probability of these outcomes given my preference is C. So C would stand in for those things that are prescribed through the genetic algorithm or through slight mutations of previous specifications of the kind of constraints that this agent should comply with. So you can also read C as constraints. You could also, I think, read C in terms of the environmental conditions. So, one way of remembering this, the role, you can think of it as costs or negative costs of rewards, but also you can think of it as constraints, but also the conditions that you were referring to in terms of what it is to be a thing that goes towards the light or avoids blue lights or whatever. That's what you specify with the genetic code. That's the thing that defines what it is. Everything else it can do, as long as it goes towards the light or avoids blue things. And it's relatively easy to demonstrate that the expected free energy has this functional form. So I thought that was an interesting point of convergence. And I repeat, that's in a number of papers, but most recently in a supervised structure learning paper, which I think so just very briefly, all these things. Yeah, this, oh, my apologies, that's redundant, it's this one I want. Yeah, so I don't know if Adam or you have read this, but it would certainly be of no surprise whatsoever to hear that phi and free energy go hand in hand, and this treatment really sort of just an early attempt just to show the internal consistency between the active inference formulations of belief updating and integrated information just running through the sort of the 5 axiomatic bases of it, integration. There are no numerical studies here, but I'm just pointing to this as, if you like, from the physicist's perspective, noting that active inference is not a theory of consciousness. And one could argue that predictive coding is not a theory of consciousness, but it may well have some interesting predictions or consistencies with theories of consciousness, such as integrated information theory. So I'm putting that out there just as a sort of motivation for why you might hypothesize that phi would increase as things become more adaptive, as defined operationally from the point of view of active inference. So that treatment was primarily actually written by Vanya, can be found in this paper, Sentience and the Origins of Consciousness, by me, although I repeat, active inference is not a theory of consciousness, should you want to use that. So we've done those 2. I think the rest of them. Oh no, sorry, the Hongju, this is for you. Just in terms of operationalizing the notion of the intentional material spaces that you were talking about that underwrite different kinds of this unified world modeling that would gracefully accommodate global neural workspace and other formulations. Just operationally, again, from a non-philosophical, practical sort of computer science or physics-based approach, I thought there was a really nice connection between the active inference formulations of intentional behavior, which is all about having now not your constraints in terms of what you feel, so what you sense in the world, like sort of a temperature, but having lifting those constraints, and indeed learning those constraints in the space of latent beliefs. And as soon as you now put these constraints on the latent beliefs that are private to you and that you have learned in a unique way, I think that's a nice metaphor for intentional behavior. Now, in the sense that I intend to behave in such a way that the outcome in my construction, in my perceptual space, in my intended, is going to be like this, and this is what I intend to. This is where I intend to be, but in my head, not in terms of keeping my temperature or my interoception within viable bounds in the sense of homeostasis. Those constraints are written in output space or observable space, whereas intentional constraints are actually acquired and live in the belief updating. And it just struck me that that was a really important, intentionality seemed to be a really important kernel of your argument. And I would agree entirely from the point of view of physicists, because to have an intention means that I have now a generative model of the future, and more specifically, a future that I have to create as an agent. So it's my future that has agency built into it, that is actually goal-directed in the sense that I have these beliefs or intentions, posterior beliefs or prior beliefs, that I will behave in such a way to get to this intended state. So it seems to have all the necessary ingredients for the kind of intentionality and agency that you were talking about, and also is equipped with things like the value, so you can measure the confidence that you're going to you're going to get to your intended state. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, if I could interrupt first, I unfortunately have to take my kid to school.
Oh, crikey, yes, because it's the morning for you, isn't it?
Thank you very much. They've got a lot of good things to read, and
blah 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 blah.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of blah blah blah.
Okay, say goodbye.
Yeah, have a lovely time at school.
Good to see you, Nora.
Sorry, Hongju, you also have your question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I have the exact Carl, by the way, very thank you. I really appreciate the invaluable comments. I will definitely I think I have to meditate more deeper on your extra comments. But I just wanted to share real quick Can I share my screen real quick right now? Okay, so this would be the way that I am trying to formalize the intentionality in terms of intentional quality. So here, as you specified out, the intentionality really plays important role and could be somewhat formalized in some sense in terms of informational difference. I believe so. Say agent is when the agent is perceiving object K, they can have different experiences, like say A, B, and C when under a different intentional quality. Like if the agent is liking the object K, then it would be experience A, and B would be when the under context dislike and under context indifferent, which would be basically different intentional quality. And that would be take a good role portion of intentionality in terms of phenomenology. So I just wanted to pull this out if you think that this makes sense in terms of modeling the intentionality, in terms of you just.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking practically how you might code that up in Python or Julia. Using so I would read this context as a kind of C here, but specifically applied to the experience, which in my world would be the posterior belief in the future, counterfactual. If at the moment this graphic doesn't have the notion of time in it, but if you put time in this, there were potential experiences that I could have. I could choose this object, which I dislike, or I could choose this object, which I like, or I could choose this one if I'm indifferent. So if the counterfactual futures that I could author by selecting a particular action, like where to look or what to grab, then you could certainly both quantify the context in terms of the probability that this was the kind of thing I intend to secure by rendering that constraint a high probability or a low surprisal, and then for the things you dislike, they will be very surprising. We're highly unlikely that I will end up in this intended state. So just, you'll forget this, but just for Peter's interest, that's encoded in something called an H tensor in active inference. So it allows you to specify likes and dislikes and contextualize things in terms of their valenced appeal for you in the space of your posterior beliefs, numerically in terms of the log probability that this is likely to be the consequences of my behavior. So what I'm saying here is that the disliking something is effectively operationalized by saying that I'm highly unlikely to be in this state or have experience B. And if I know that, then I can roll out into the future and deselect any potential behaviors that would end up with me having the experience B, which for me has a low probability. And what I was saying before was that's normally done in output space. It's normally done in terms of temperature or blood sugar or monetary reward. You're getting clickbait through visual, but I think the fact you've written down experience here means that it's not actually the sensation, it's a percept. And furthermore, it's a counterfactual percept that's an experience in the future that's consequent to my behavior that renders now it intentional. So you're putting time explicitly in. The other nice thing about having it framed in that way is that now you can select. So if you now have experience A, B, and C hasn't yet happened, but could happen, then you've got, as part of this agentic planning, the opportunity now to describe the act of selecting that particular intended or evincing this intentional behavior or choice this kind of goal-directed behavior as an act of Bayesian model selection. And of course, then you can start to talk about free will in the context of another kind of action, which is selecting your course into the future that only you know about, because it's all predicated on your intentions and your likes and dislikes that you have learned. So these can't be prescribed genetically, because you're not born with a deep generative model that actually can run out into the future. You have to acquire and build this through experience and interaction with people. Is that what you had in mind?
Yeah, I think it really makes sense to include the time portion regarding, I just handled the dislike, especially context dislike and like and indifferent, those as all different category, but it actually is in somewhat can be put on the linear, I would say, and share some, share same the some of the categorical I don't know how to get it. It is hard to put in words, but
you don't need to. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, so certainly when we model these things, it's either sort of like it or don't like it, and indeed, interestingly, the implementation of this kind of intentional inference in the MATLAB code. I don't know. Peter will have to speak to the Julia code. Does require upon very precise beliefs that are basically like that. Never want to go there. So it's even there actually is an indifference. So you're either sort of this is an intended goal, and everything else is not intended, or this is a constraint. So in fact, the implementation just to basically finesse the numerics so you can deal with very precise logical operators does actually categorize likes and dislikes. But if you don't have to do it like that, you could actually have log probabilities and make it continuous if you wanted to.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, you better do your school run now then, and we better convene again. I think if people are.
I think it would be best.
I forgot it was.
In the meanwhile, we'll have a recording watching party together, and we'll go over your comments in detail, and that'll make for some good fun, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I'll share the recording link with you, hopefully by the end of the week. So it just takes a couple of days for us to download it and upload it and everything. But yeah, I'll send it to you as soon as possible. Thank you all so much. Let's just give a round of applause to everybody for the attendees, for the great questions, and for the great discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Truly, thanks.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Have a great evening. Bye.